I recently came across a story about a completely ordinary guy. Every day, he sits at a desk, staring at a monitor filled with pale blue interfaces and light gray buttons, the exact same calming colors you'd see when saving a spreadsheet or sending a corporate email. One afternoon, he clicks one of those dull office gray buttons, grabs his coat, and heads home. An hour later, he's sitting at his kitchen table eating dinner with his family, casually asking his kids about their day at school. It sounds like the perfectly mundane routine of a mid-level data entry clerk. But here's the terrifying catch. When he clicked that button, 10,000 miles away, a human being instantly ceased to exist. He didn't hear a single sound. He didn't see a drop of blood. He just watched a gray, pixelated rectangle vanish from his screen. What really struck me wasn't just the chilling detachment of his job as a military drone operator, but a specific detail about the artificial intelligence he was relying on. The algorithm guiding these strikes had been trained by humans clicking through thousands of photos. Somewhere in that massive data set, the AI internalized a fatal flaw. It couldn't tell the difference between a rocket launcher and a wooden walking stick. Because of that hidden line of code, an innocent man with a cane was quietly flagged as a priority target and eliminated. Meanwhile, the operator drove home to his family, experiencing no more physical or emotional weight than if he had just closed a pop-up window on his browser. That bizarre juxtaposition, the horrific finality of war colliding directly with the sterile, consequence-free environment of modern office work, left me completely unsettled. It makes you wonder, when we strip away all the physical mess, the hesitation, and the moral weight of taking a life, turning it into nothing more than an automated procedure, are we actually making war cleaner, or have we just engineered a system where absolutely no one has to feel guilty about the killing?
Yeah, that story, it completely breaks your brain when you really sit with it.
It does.
Because to understand how we got to a point where taking a life feels, just like closing a browser window, we have to look at what actually happens to the people sitting behind those screens.
Right. Because the whole idea that this is a completely consequence-free environment is just a massive illusion, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a complete myth. And I think the best way to explain this is to talk about a former sensor operator. We'll call him David to keep things anonymous.
Yeah. Tell us about David.
So David's experience completely upends everything we think we know about combat trauma. Like, when you think of a veteran returning from war, what do you picture? You picture someone coming back from a deployment with physical scars, right? Or at least someone who spent months in a geographically distinct, really dangerous place.
Right, like they were deployed overseas, they were in the thick of it.
Exactly. But David didn't deploy anywhere. His entire battleground was literally just a refrigerated, windowless shipping container sitting on the tarmac at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada.
Wow. Just a shipping container in Nevada. We really have to paint a picture of what that environment is actually like for you listening, because you have to picture yourself walking into this metal box in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, and the air conditioning is just cranked so high to keep the server racks from melting. Right. So you have to wear a fleece jacket in July.
It's July in Nevada, and you're wearing a fleece, and it probably smells like, I don't know, ozone and stale coffee.
Ozone, stale coffee, cheap floor cleaner.
Yeah.
There were 0 windows. Literally, the only light comes from this bank of glowing monitors.
And for weeks at a time, David's job was to just sit in that freezing box and perform what is clinically called pattern of life analysis, which sounds so incredibly sterile.
It's a highly sanitized term for what is essentially just relentless, intimate stalking from 10,000 feet up in the air.
Stalking. Wow.
Yeah, because pattern of life analysis isn't just, looking for a target and pulling a trigger. It requires an operator to observe an individual day after day, week after week.
So they are learning everything about this person.
Everything. They map out where this person sleeps, who they meet with, where they buy their bread in the morning, everything.
And in David's case, he was tracking a mid-level insurgent, right?
Right.
And the surveillance tech they use is just so advanced now, it's so high definition, that the intimacy becomes deeply uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable is putting it lightly. David watched this man for so long that he literally learned his physical quirks.
Wait, what?
Like, he knew the man had a limp. He could see how he favored his left leg when he walked across this dusty courtyard. And he watched this same man, this officially designated enemy combatant, play soccer with his kids in the afternoon.
Oh, and that is, watching him play with his kids.
Yeah. And that level of observation, it creates this profound psychological bind. Because the military doctrine requires the operator to view the target strictly as a hostile threat that must be neutralized.
Right, just a target.
But human neurobiology just doesn't work like that. When you watch a man favor a bad leg or play with his children, your brain naturally engages mirror neurons.
So you start to empathize.
Exactly. You begin to instinctively understand his physical pain. You recognize the universal body language of a father playing with his kids.
You essentially develop unauthorized empathy.
Unauthorized empathy. The military protocols just don't account for the fact that staring at someone for like 150 hours forces you to recognize their fundamental humanity.
Right, because you can't just unsee the dad playing soccer.
And then, after weeks of building this silent, one-sided relationship, the strike authorization comes down through David's headset.
God, and the actual execution of the strike is terrifying in its mechanical simplicity, isn't it?
I mean, David was the sensor operator, meaning his hand was on the joystick controlling the targeting laser.
So he didn't fly the drone itself.
No, the pilot flies it. David's sole job was to keep the crosshairs painted on the target. So he lasers the man in the courtyard. The Hellfire missile, which is launched from thousands of feet above, takes several seconds to descend.
Which means David has to watch those seconds tick down.
Just sitting there, keeping the laser completely steady on this man he's been watching for weeks. The missile connects. And on David's screen, the thermal imaging just balloons into this massive, featureless white blur.
The man is just evaporated.
Evaporated. And here is where the psychological reality of this new type of warfare diverges from literally everything in human history.
Because there's no wind down.
Exactly. Think about traditional combat. The adrenaline spike of a firefight takes hours, sometimes days, to dissipate. And it happens while the soldier is surrounded by their unit in a war zone, sharing that collective reality.
Right, you're in it together.
But for David, his shift simply ended.
That is the part that I find so incredibly hard to wrap my head around. Like, 40 minutes after evaporating a human being, David just walks out of that dark, freezing shipping container and steps into the blinding 100-degree Nevada sun.
Just a normal Tuesday commute.
Right. He gets into his silver Honda Civic, he turns the key, and he just drives out the base gates, merging into regular civilian traffic.
And that jarring transition is exactly what researchers identify as a primary catalyst for a very specific type of trauma. So David drove to a local Wendy's.
Okay.
He was just sitting in the drive-through lane.
I mean, think about the sensory whiplash here for you listening. A top 40 pop song is playing on his radio. He's smelling the heavy grease of French fries, the exhaust from the car idling in front of him.
Right, perfectly normal, everyday stuff.
And less than an hour ago, he was basically God in a metal box watching a man die. And now he's just a guy waiting to order a burger.
And that is exactly when it hit him. His brain just couldn't reconcile the two realities. And he didn't break down crying in some heroic cinematic way, you know. The physical reaction was visceral. It was immediate.
What happened?
He violently threw up all over the steering wheel of his Civic.
Yeah.
He just sat there weeping in this deep, humiliating shame, completely paralyzed by the sheer, terrifying absurdity of his daily commute.
He was literally toggling between domestic suburban life and mechanized murder without a single physical buffer.
Exactly. And when we look at the neurobiology of how the brain processes context and safety, David's reaction makes perfect sense.
Okay, unpack the neurobiology for us a bit.
Sure. So historically, going to war required a physical departure. A soldier got on a boat or they got on a plane. They traveled to a geographically distinct combat zone.
Right, they left home.
Right. And that physical journey creates a psychological boundary. You are at war. And then eventually you leave that physical space and you return home. Your brain uses the physical environment to cue its nervous system.
Right, so if you are a traditional soldier and you leave the battlefield, your brain can look around and say, okay, there are no bombs here, I am in my living room, the threat is gone, I can downregulate.
You feel safe because you are physically safe.
But for an RPA operator, a remotely piloted aircraft operator like David, the battlefield is just a digital interface. It's literally just a screen.
And that is the crux of the entire problem.
Wait, let me just think about that for a second. If the war happens on a monitor, how does the brain ever truly register that it is safe when you are looking at literally any other screen back home?
It doesn't.
It's like a nervous system tracked permanently in threat mode.
Exactly. Because the physical environment of the act of killing is sitting in an ergonomic chair in an air-conditioned room staring at a high-definition monitor.
God. So when David goes home and sits in his own ergonomic chair in his air-conditioned living room, staring at his television or his laptop,
his brain is receiving the exact same environmental cues it receives when he is conducting a lethal strike.
the physical architecture of his work and his leisure are basically indistinguishable.
And this is exactly why the trauma these operators face is frequently miscategorized by the public. Like, when people hear about drone operators suffering from severe psychological distress, the immediate assumption is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right, because that's the phrase we always associate with veterans.
But PTSD, in a clinical sense, is typically rooted in a fear-based response to an immediate physical threat to your own life or safety.
Yeah.
Your brain thinks you are about to die, and it gets stuck in that survival loop.
Right, the fight or flight response?
Exactly. But our PA operators are not in physical danger. I mean, no one is shooting at the shipping container in Nevada.
Okay, so if it's not a fear of dying that's breaking them, what is it?
It is what psychologists and military researchers identify as moral injury.
Moral injury.
And this is a profoundly different mechanism of trauma. Moral injury is the psychological, behavioral, or spiritual harm that results from acts that transgress deeply held moral or ethical beliefs.
So it's an injury to the soul, essentially. Not the nervous system's fear center, but the human conscience itself.
It occurs from acts of commission like directly participating in a strike that accidentally kills civilians, for example.
Right.
Or acts of omission like being ordered to observe a horrific atrocity on the drone feed and being told you do not have authorization to intervene. You just have to sit there and watch it happen.
God, I can't even imagine that. Just watching and being completely helpless.
It's devastating. And the research indicates that this kind of inner conflict is so severe that some military branches actively resist using the term moral injury.
Really? They won't use the term.
Yeah, they prefer sanitized terms like inner conflict. Because acknowledging a moral injury legally skirts dangerously close to suggesting a soldier violated the laws of armed conflict.
They don't want to admit the act itself is morally damaging, so they basically blame the operator's internal processing. They make it a you problem.
Exactly. It's a liability issue for them. But we also have to look at how the labor is actually divided inside that shipping container to understand who takes the heaviest psychological hit.
Right, because it's not just one guy flying the drone and dropping the bomb.
No, it's a team effort.
Yeah.
You have the pilot who handles the aircraft's flight path, and then you have the sensor operator, like David. They sit side by side, shoulder to shoulder in the container.
But the sensor operator is the one physically guiding the laser.
Yes. They have the direct tactile control over the delivery of the weapon.
And because of that direct engagement, I imagine they feel a lot more responsible.
The data shows that sensor operators often bear a significantly heavier psychological burden. And, there's a demographic component to this as well that we have to talk about. Well, the military literature highlights that sensor operators are frequently younger, enlisted personnel. They are relative novices compared to the commissioned officers who are piloting the aircraft.
Wow. So you are taking a 19 or 20-year-old kid and placing them into this heavy role.
You are placing them into the role of what researchers call the extreme moral witness.
Extreme moral witness.
It stems from the nature of the technology itself. The MQ-9 Reaper drone is equipped with optical and thermal sensors of such incredibly high resolution that the warfare becomes intensely visual.
Visual in a way it never was before.
Right. Think about previous eras of air combat. A pilot dropped a bomb based on coordinates and immediately banked away to evade anti-aircraft fire.
Right. They never stuck around to see the dust settle. The speed and altitude created an emotional detachment.
But a drone loiters. After a strike is authorized and executed, the pilot doesn't fly away. In fact, they are ordered to maneuver the aircraft back over the target to conduct a post-strike assessment.
Meaning they literally have to look at what they just did.
They are forced to stare at it. Both the pilot and the sensor operator are exposed to the carnage twice, first during the strike and then in the immediate aftermath.
That is so dark.
And the optics allow them to zoom in to within roughly 10 feet of the strike site.
10 feet. That's closer than I am to the other side of this room right now.
It's incredibly intimate.
At that magnification, the abstraction of a thermal blur completely vanishes. You aren't looking at a pixelated rectangle anymore. You are looking at a crater. You are looking at severed limbs. You are looking at the graphic, undeniable reality of the human body that has been torn apart by high explosives. And because of the pattern of life analysis we talked about, you're looking at the shattered face of a man you just watched play soccer with his kids 2 days ago.
And that reality shatters the prevailing public myth that drone warfare is somehow clean or surgical or detached for the people operating the system.
Right, because we always hear it's a cleaner way to fight a war.
It's not clean. Yes, the technology completely removes the physical risk to the operator, But in doing so, it exponentially increases the visual and psychological intimacy with the act of killing.
It's basically front row seats to murder.
And the military tries to manage this tension through language, actually. They rely heavily on dehumanizing jargon to create distance.
Right, military slang is famous for this. What kind of jargon?
So they will call a deceased target a bug splat.
A bug splat? Seriously?
Yeah, because of how the body looks on the thermal monitor after a strike. And they call a human being running in terror from an explosion a squirter.
God, that is grim.
The linguistic framing is totally designed to reduce the target to a mere signature, just an object on a screen.
But there has to be a massive cognitive dissonance when that linguistic distancing collides with the high-definition reality of a 10-foot zoom.
There is one. Yeah. The operator's headset is telling them they hit an object, but their own eyes are feeding them undeniable proof of a shattered human being.
It creates a situation where the operator's own eyes are betraying the military's sanitized narrative. I mean, you are sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled office park in Nevada, engaging in the most intimate, high-definition killing imaginable.
And this leads to two distinct forms of psychological damage. First, there is the acute trauma, the sudden violent realization that you have violated your own moral code.
Which is exactly what we saw with David in the Wendy's drive-thru.
Exactly. But then there is also this insidious desensitization. Over time, just to survive the cognitive dissonance, the brain simply hardens. A person becomes emotionally numb to the daily reality of taking life.
Because they have to, or they'd break completely.
Right. And the military's human performance teams are trying to address this by bringing in psychologists and chaplains to teach operators about just war theory before they ever sit at the console.
Just war theory, like philosophical ethics.
Yeah, but philosophical frameworks don't turn off mirror neurons. You can't outthink basic human empathy.
Okay, so if the high-definition visuals of human suffering are literally breaking the minds of the operators, how does the military solve that? Because, let's be real, they aren't going to stop the drone program. The logic of remote warfare is way too deeply entrenched.
They aren't going to stop.
So if you can't fix the war, and you can't rewire human empathy, you just change the screen. You hide the human.
Yes, you redesign the interface to intentionally strip away that heavy moral weight. And this is where the architecture of military technology crosses a very, very dark line.
So
we transition from traditional military instrumentation into literal gamification.
Gamification. Okay, yes. Because this story feels like a dystopian sci-fi script, but you're telling me it is happening right now.
It is happening right now. So Marcus was a 19-year-old kid who didn't come through a traditional military academy pipeline at all.
Where did they find him?
He's recruited straight out of competitive esports.
Esports, like professional video gaming.
Yes.
Oh.
The military looked at his hand-eye coordination, his spatial awareness, his ability to track multiple targets on a screen, and they said, we need that.
Wild.
But they didn't put him in a traditional cockpit, right? They sat him in front of these high-definition curved screens and handed him a controller that was, for all intents and purposes, identical to an Xbox gamepad.
An Xbox controller to fly a lethal drone. And the interface design is critical here, right? Because the software Marcus used was intentionally engineered to abstract humanity out of the equation.
Completely.
So he isn't seeing the high-def video of a guy with a limp playing soccer like David did.
Well, the interface primarily relied on heat signatures. So he was just looking at glowing red dots moving against a dark background.
Very arcade-like.
And crucially, the system incorporated user feedback loops that were designed by software engineers, not tacticians.
What do you mean by feedback loops?
Well, when Marcus executed a successful strike, the interface didn't just show an explosion, it rewarded him.
Rewarded him?
There was a crisp, satisfying auditory chime in his headset, and a clean graphic flashed on the screen confirming a splash.
That's literally the exact same dopamine hit you get when you level up in a video game or clear a row in Tetris.
It is exactly the same mechanism. Marcus actually said that for the first 6 months of his deployment, dropping a payload on a target felt exactly like climbing the ranked ladder in Call of Duty.
Fine. The moral weight of taking a human life was completely engineered out of his fingertips. He wasn't killing, he was scoring.
Yes, what you are describing is the systemic application of gamification to lethal force. And we need to be clear, we aren't just talking about militainment here.
Militainment?
Yeah, militainment is using video games for recruitment, like that old America's Army game, or using them for simulation training. This is different. Gamification is taking game design elements, points, badges, leaderboards, auditory rewards, and hardwiring them directly into the operational architecture of live combat.
It's hijacking the brain's reward center to completely bypass the conscience.
Exactly. It acts as a psychological buffer. It translates the incredibly complex, morally fraught, chaotic reality of war into a simple, predictable, satisfying user journey.
A user journey for dropping bombs.
Right. The interface manages Marcus's cognitive load. It prevents the mirror neurons from firing. It feeds him a sanitized, heavily filtered reality so he can operate efficiently without the hesitation that empathy naturally causes.
But a manufactured reality like that is incredibly fragile, isn't it? I mean, it only works as long as the screen doesn't glitch.
And for Marcus, the screen glitched.
Tell us about the glitch, because this is the moment the whole facade drops.
So the breaking point for Marcus occurred during a night operation. He was observing a compound. He executed a strike just like normal. The system chimed in his ear. But immediately after the impact, the drone's infrared camera malfunctioned. It dropped the thermal filter entirely. So suddenly, that clean, abstract world of glowing red dots vanished, and raw, unedited optical footage just flooded his monitor.
The digital curtain was completely pulled back.
Yes. And the dust clearing on his screen didn't reveal a bug splat. It revealed a teenage boy.
A teenager.
And the boy was missing an arm, and he was desperately trying to drag himself through the rubble of the building Marcus had just leveled.
God, so Marcus is just sitting there staring at a child bleeding out in the dirt.
But the true horror of it is how the machine reacted to the scene.
What did the machine do?
The software, attempting to autocorrect and categorize what it was seeing, coldly drew a crisp neon blue targeting box around the boy, dragging himself through the dirt, and a text label popped up on the screen. Unidentified moving debris.
Unidentified moving debris applied to a dying teenager.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the interface's design. The system tries to force the human back into the sterile, gamified logic of the software.
But for Marcus, that profound, nauseating reality of permanent human destruction just completely shattered the digital glass.
It did. And his gamer instincts kicked in, but in the worst possible way.
What did he do?
In a state of pure panic, Marcus started frantically mashing the buttons on his controller. He was desperately searching the screen for a pause menu. He was looking for a quick load feature, a way to back out to the main menu, a way to, like you said earlier, exit to the lobby.
He was trying to undo the code. He wanted to restart the level.
Exactly. But when he finally realized there is no reset button in reality, he just dropped the controller.
Wow.
And the sound of that cheap plastic controller clattering onto the floor of the control room while he watched the boy stop moving on the screen, I mean, it completely exposes the lie that we can sanitize war through technology.
It does. That moment of technological failure reveals this terrifying truth. Gamified warfare relies entirely on maintaining a persistent fiction. And when that fiction breaks, the operator is left to confront the full, unmitigated moral weight of their actions, but they have absolutely zero psychological preparation for it.
None. They haven't been trained to process grief or guilt. They've been trained to chase a high score.
And despite knowing this breaks human beings, militaries aren't backing away from gamification, are they?
Well, they're doubling down.
They're expanding it from these individual screens in Nevada to entire systemic, national, operational models. I mean, look at what is happening in Ukraine right now.
Right. Ukraine is a perfect example.
This is the first major conflict where gamification is being systematically integrated into the actual conduct of hostilities across an entire theater of war.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation launched something called the Army of Drones bonus system.
Okay, tell us about this bonus system, because it sounds surreal.
It is not a metaphor. It is a literal points-based reward architecture for lethal combat.
Really? Points for combat?
Yes. Frontline drone teams record video of their strikes. They upload these verified videos into a situational awareness network called the Delta system.
Okay.
Once military intelligence verifies the strike on the video, the unit is awarded E-points.
You're telling me they literally have an Amazon for war. That sounds like a dystopian satire, not a real military strategy. How does a point system translate to actual warfare?
Well, these E-points function as a digital currency. The drone teams can take their accumulated E-points and redeem them on a platform called the Brave One Market.
The Brave Market.
Right. It is essentially an e-commerce platform for military hardware, so they can spend their points to buy new surveillance drones, advanced electronic warfare kits, or unmanned ground vehicles for medical evacuation.
It is the complete gamification of military procurement. Instead of a quartermaster allocating supplies based on strategic need, Units are out there grinding for loot drops.
Exactly like grinding for loot in an RPG. And the way these points are assigned is fascinating because it reflects cold, calculated strategic priorities.
How are they weighted?
A destroyed enemy tank is worth a massive amount of points, but destroying an infantry position is worth less.
It creates a competitive leaderboard based entirely on destruction.
Yes. The officials who designed the system actually admitted they had to be pretty much emotionless when putting a numerical price on human lives and military assets.
And I imagine as a motivational tool, it is terrifyingly effective.
Reports indicated that 400 drone teams competing on this system killed or wounded 18,000 Russian soldiers in a single month.
But what happens when you turn war into a points-based competition? I'm thinking of Goodhart's law here.
Yes, Goodhart's law is so relevant here.
It's a principle from economics and social science which states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Exactly.
But explain how that applies to a battlefield for us, because if the measure is destroy the enemy and the target is get points for destroying the enemy, it seems like they align perfectly. Where does it break down?
It breaks down in tactical judgment. Because once operational success is strictly quantified and attached to a digital scorecard, units begin chasing the score rather than the actual strategic objective. The metrics warp the behavior. If a unit needs a few more E-points to afford a new electronic warfare jammer, they might prioritize a point-rich target, like an isolated vehicle, over a strategically necessary maneuver.
Like providing cover fire for an infantry advance, which yields 0 points.
They start farming kills.
Farming kills in real life, that is insane.
You see massive operational inefficiencies emerge. The reports detail how drone units will literally stack multiple platforms against a single target.
So instead of sending one drone to disable a vehicle, they send 3.
Yes, just to make sure they secure the points on the leaderboard. There are even documented instances of units deliberately attacking enemy vehicles that have already been disabled and abandoned.
Wasting ammo on empty trucks.
Yes, wasting highly scarce munitions simply to pad their stats and earn more E-points. The metric, designed to reward efficiency, actually generates massive waste.
Because the goal is no longer winning the battle, the goal is getting the points.
Right. War becomes less about achieving a strategic end state and more about grinding down assets for digital currency.
It really makes you wonder if this gamification is functioning as a manufactured form of moral disengagement on a societal level. Well, think about how social media platforms are designed today. The algorithms are built by attention engineers to completely hijack our dopamine systems.
True.
They feed us likes, retweets, and engagement metrics to keep us endlessly scrolling. We don't even realize time is passing. These military interfaces seem to be using the exact same psychological mechanisms, but instead of keeping you scrolling, they are designed to bypass moral hesitation to keep operators firing.
And it acts as an anesthesia for the soul.
Anesthesia for the soul, yeah.
The stoic, tragic tone that has historically accompanied wartime combat is replaced by this playful, competitive, dopamine-driven cycle. The foundation of the system is death, but the experience of the system is a game.
And it isn't just limited to the professional soldiers anymore, is it? This gamification is bleeding over into civilian populations, completely blurring the lines of who is actually participating in a war.
Absolutely. There was a project called Play for Ukraine that illustrates this perfectly.
Play for Ukraine.
Okay. This is a perfect example of how the interface obscures the reality of the action. Play for Ukraine was just a browser-based puzzle game.
A puzzle game?
Yeah. If you went to the website, it looked incredibly similar to the popular mobile game 2048. You just slide numbered tiles around on a grid.
Right, it looks totally harmless. You're sitting in a coffee shop in London, sliding tiles on your phone while waiting for your latte. It feels like a casual digital distraction.
But beneath the surface, the underlying code of the game had a dual purpose. Every time a player made a move, the website directed background internet traffic to conduct distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attacks against Russian government and military websites.
Wait, so by playing a puzzle game, ordinary civilians were unwittingly, or perhaps wittingly if they read the fine print, participating in international cyber warfare.
Yes, they were acting as a node in a cyber weapon.
Which opens up a massive legal and ethical Pandora's box. I mean, the entire foundation of international humanitarian law, or IHL, is built on the principle of distinction.
Right, combatants versus civilians.
Exactly. Combatants are legitimate targets. Civilians are protected from attack. A civilian only loses that protection if they take a direct part in hostilities.
And that's where the legal gray area becomes incredibly dangerous.
So if a teenager in a cafe in Kyiv or a graphic designer in Berlin is sliding tiles on a browser game that is actively participating in a cyber attack against foreign infrastructure, are they now a combatant? Have they surrendered their civilian protection? Can their coffee shop legally be bombed?
Well, under a strict interpretation of IHL, if they are taking a direct part in hostilities, they could technically be classified as targetable.
Terrifying.
But the interface acts as a shield, hiding the reality of the action from the user. The player just sees themselves as showing political solidarity or, honestly, just playing a game.
They don't perceive themselves as engaging in acts of war.
Exactly. The legal and ethical constraints that normally govern human behavior have essentially migrated away from the individual and into the interface design.
The law isn't an external rulebook anymore. It is just a set of parameters decided by the programmers.
Right.
Which brings us to the most terrifying part of this whole deep dive, honestly. What happens when we remove the human operator from the loop almost entirely?
Oh, autonomous weapons.
Yeah. What happens when the code itself makes the lethal decision? This is where the accountability vacuum becomes absolute. Let's look at the story of Elena.
Elena's story is crucial because she represents the new front line of weapons development. She's not a soldier. She has never been to boot camp. She's just a 24-year-old machine learning specialist.
Right. She works for a defense contractor in Northern Virginia. And we need to picture this environment for you listening because the contrast is essential to understanding the absurdity of this.
It's a very specific vibe.
She works in one of those hyper-modern tech offices. They have kombucha on tap in the break room. The bathrooms smell like eucalyptus. People literally ride electric scooters to their desks.
Very Silicon Valley.
And her role was to write object recognition code for a loitering munition swarm.
Which, for those who might not know, a loitering munition swarm is a group of autonomous drones designed to fly into an area, hover or loiter, and independently identify and attack targets without requiring a human to pull the trigger.
They just hunt on their own.
Yes.
And Elena is writing the code that tells these drones how to see the world. But she's writing this critical lethal code on a distracted Tuesday afternoon. She's worried about an upcoming performance review with her manager. She's stressed about a mundane dispute with her roommate about dirty dishes. She's just doing her office job.
And that environment you describe is critical to understanding the legal problem here.
So,
the development of weapons has always been complex. But the development of highly autonomous weapons shifts the locus of control away from the battlefield and into these civilian tech offices.
the coders become the commanders.
Exactly. As the law stands today, a highly autonomous weapons system has the potential to partly or fully displace combat personnel from the roles they traditionally occupy.
The software takes over.
Right. The system's control software essentially steps into the shoes of the human operator. Therefore, developers like Elena are exerting an unprecedented degree of control over not just what the weapon can do, but what it actually does in the field.
Okay, we really need to break down how this technology actually works because people hear AI and they think of a thinking, reasoning brain, like a sci-fi robot.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception.
But that's not what Elena was building. How does an algorithm actually see a rocket launcher?
It's not looking at the object and understanding what it is.
Right.
No, it has zero contextual understanding. Machine learning relies on computer vision algorithms that simply process pixels.
Just pixel.
Yeah. Elena's job was to train a neural network using thousands of images of weapons and non-weapons. The algorithm looks for patterns in the pixels' edges, contrast shapes.
Okay.
It draws what are called bounding boxes around objects. It recognizes and assigns a statistical probability to them.
Bounding boxes, like a square on the screen.
Right. For example, it might draw a box around a shape and say, I am 85% confident this cluster of pixels represents the shape of a rocket-propelled grenade launcher.
It's purely statistical. It doesn't know what an RPG is. It just knows that this arrangement of light and dark pixels matches the mathematical model of its training data.
And if the training data is flawed, or if the real-world environment presents something the system hasn't seen before, the mathematical model breaks down completely.
Which is exactly what happened in Elena's case.
Yes.
Months after Elena wrote that code, a munitions swarm utilizing her algorithm was deployed in a conflict zone. The swarm encountered a group of local villagers walking through a field.
Innocent people.
Completely innocent. The villagers were carrying long metal irrigation pipes on their shoulders to water their crops. But the algorithm, running purely on its statistical probabilities and bounding boxes, looked at the length, the metallic reflection, and the way the objects were being carried, and it classified those metal pipes as RPGs.
Because it lacks human context. A human pilot would see the field, see the civilian clothing, understand the context of agriculture, and know those were pipes.
Obviously.
But the algorithm just saw a cylinder with a 90% match to its threat database.
And based on that classification, the autonomous system initiated a lethal strike. The villagers were killed. Now, when the classified after-action report circulated, the blame shifting that occurred is just a masterclass in modern bureaucratic evasion. Yeah.
Everyone points the finger at someone else.
Right. The military commander who authorized the deployment of the swarm pointed to the technical parameters of the system, saying he trusted the contractor's accuracy rates.
The hardware manufacturer, in turn, blamed the military's deployment strategy. They argue the system was designed for conventional battlefields and was used outside of its intended operational scope by being deployed near civilian infrastructure.
And the legal team for the defense contractor simply cited AI hallucination, framing the deaths as an unforeseeable technological anomaly.
And this reveals the terrifying gaping hole in our current legal frameworks. International humanitarian law, and specifically the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, is not equipped to handle software that kills.
What does the Rome Statute say?
Article 25 of the Rome Statute deals with individual criminal responsibility. It covers aiding and abetting a war crime. But aiding and abetting requires a very specific legal standard.
So to hold Elena accountable, a prosecutor would have to prove in court that when she was typing code on her keyboard in Virginia, she specifically intended to facilitate a war crime.
Which is impossible. She was eating a protein bar and worrying about her roommate's dirty dishes. There was zero malicious intent.
Right, she was just doing her tech job.
Furthermore, there is a massive temporal and geographic gap here. The Programming Act happened months, perhaps years before the physical strike occurred, and 10,000 miles away.
So bridging that temporal gap between the civilian office and the battlefield to assign criminal liability is legally near impossible under current jurisprudence.
Almost entirely impossible, yes.
So nobody goes to jail. No one is formally charged. The commander is cleared, the CEO of the contractor is cleared, and Elena is legally untouchable.
Untouchable on paper, yes.
But Elena still found out what her code did. The internal after-action memo leaked within the company, and the realization was horrifying.
Imagine.
The story gains that she locked herself in that eucalyptus-scented company bathroom, staring at her own hands, realizing that a few lines of code she typed had literally destroyed a family.
While the legal and corporate system was perfectly designed to shield absolutely everyone from formal accountability,
it is an absolute paradox. We're perfectly willing to give machines the lethal authority of humans. We let them decide who lives and who dies.
Right.
But when those machines kill innocent people, we strip them of human agency and treat the event like a hurricane or an earthquake. We treat it like an act of nature, an unavoidable tragedy with no human author.
it is exactly like a massive corporate shell game.
Yes. The act of taking a life is sliced so incredibly thinly among the coders, the data labelers, the engineers, the procurement officers, and the military commanders that the actual murderer simply ceases to exist on paper.
And that corporate shell game relies on a systemic phenomenon known as the moral crumple zone.
The moral crumple zone, I really need you to unpack that because it perfectly captures how we sacrifice people to protect systems.
It really is the perfect term. The term was coined by a technology researcher named Madeline Eilish. It describes situations where human operators are blamed for errors or accidents that are not entirely in their control.
Okay, give us an example.
Think about how a car is designed. The crumple zone at the front of a vehicle is engineered to crush upon impact.
Right, absorbing the physical force of a crash to protect the engine and the passengers inside the cabin.
Exactly. In highly automated systems, the human operator serves the exact same function, but for liability.
Wow.
The human absorbs the legal and moral impact of a complex, systemic technological failure, protecting the corporation and the engineers from liability.
To really understand how this works, we can look outside the military for a second, right? Because the most vivid analogy for the moral crumple zone is the Uber self-driving car fatality in 2018.
Yes. That case is the textbook example.
Okay.
So in 2018, Uber was testing experimental autonomous driving vehicles in Arizona.
Right, self-driving cars.
The AI system failed to recognize a pedestrian, Elaine Herzberg, who was walking her bicycle across a dark highway. The system's logs showed that the AI was confused. It rapidly reclassified her as different objects: a vehicle, a bicycle, an unknown object.
It couldn't figure out her trajectory.
Exactly. The car generated a plan to steer around her 1.5 seconds before impact, and then the algorithm realized it couldn't execute the maneuver. But it didn't sound an audible alert to the human safety driver sitting behind the wheel until 0.2 seconds before the crash.
0.2 seconds? That's not even enough time to blink.
No. But now, look at the systemic failures that Uber engineered into that vehicle before the crash ever happened.
What did they do?
Uber executives had intentionally turned down the sensitivity of the AI safety parameters.
Wait, why would they turn down safety parameters?
Because the system was generating too many false alarms, and it was annoying the test drivers and making the ride feel jerky. Furthermore, Uber had previously mandated 2 safety drivers in every test vehicle. But they changed the policy to require only 1 driver, removing the conversational partner that helps keep the driver alert.
Right. They dumbed down the safety software to make the ride smoother, and they put a single human in the car, asking them to monitor a highly reliable autonomous system for hours on end in the dark.
Which over 70 years of human factors research tells us is a recipe for catastrophic failure.
70 years of research.
Yeah. During World War II, researchers studied British naval radar operators. They found that as shifts dragged on, the operators increasingly missed blips on the screen representing enemy submarines.
Okay.
This phenomenon is called vigilance decrement. The human brain cannot maintain active attention on a passive, highly reliable automated system. The brain literally begins to fall asleep with the eyes open.
You just zone out.
Completely. You cannot ask a human to sit perfectly still for hours doing nothing and then expect them to instantly intervene and save a life in the 0.2 seconds before a disaster.
And despite all of those massive, systemic, organizational failures by the engineers and executives at Uber, the flawed AI, the reduced safety parameters, the solo driving policy, the ignorance of basic human factors research, what happened?
When the legal dust settled, Uber faced 0 criminal liability.
0.
The judge determined that the single human test driver, who was admittedly distracted by her phone because her brain had succumbed to vigilance decrement, was held entirely solely liable for the pedestrian's death.
Believable.
She was charged with negligent homicide. The human absorbed all the blame for a failure that was heavily engineered by the corporation.
The driver was the moral crumple zone.
Exactly. And militaries are creating these exact same scenarios. When they place human operators in highly automated combat environments, characterized by automation bias, where the human blindly trusts the machine's judgment and vigilance decrement, they're engineering situations where human error is a statistical inevitability.
It's guaranteed to happen eventually.
Yes. Researcher Kate Devitt calls this creating cooked apples.
Cooked apples, like bad apples.
We always hear the phrase, a few bad apples, to describe soldiers who intentionally commit war crimes, or mad apples for those who suffer a psychological break under pressure.
Right.
But a cooked apple is an inherently good, well-intentioned soldier who is placed into an untenable, highly automated decision-making environment. The system engineers the failure, but when the civilian is killed, the human operator takes all the blame.
They suffer the moral injury.
They go on trial, while the creators, the coders in Virginia, and the commanders remain completely insulated.
So when we pull all of this together, David throwing up in his car, Marcus staring at the gamified rubble, Elena locking herself in the bathroom, the moral crumple zones, what we are witnessing is a fundamental transformation of what war actually is.
The complete paradigm shift.
War has become an office job. And office jobs naturally produce boredom. They produce eye strain, fatigue, and corporate burnout. But they are meticulously, intentionally designed not to produce the profound, soul-crushing guilt of looking another human being in the eye before taking their life.
No, the system protects against guilt at all costs.
The gamified interfaces, the abstraction of human bodies into data points and glowing pixels, the physical distance of 10,000 miles, it all serves a single purpose. It sanitizes the experience.
And that absence of guilt is the true dark triumph of modern military technology. I mean, for decades, the public relations narrative has been that these advancements are about making war more precise, minimizing collateral damage, making it cleaner. But the unstated structural objective was to make the act of killing less heavy for the executioner.
Right.
By translating the chaos of combat into the sterile language of spreadsheets, leaderboards, digital chimes, and algorithmic bounding boxes, the system is successfully stripping away the final remaining moral brakes that have historically governed human conflict.
The hesitation that naturally arises from recognizing another human's dignity, the empathy that stops a trigger finger, is being aggressively engineered out of the loop.
It's being erased entirely.
It is the architecture of an entirely new kind of violence, built on a chain of desensitization. Because think about the sequence of events now. The algorithm that selects the target has no finger to pull a trigger, no conscience, and no capacity for empathy. The operator who pushes the button is sitting safely 10,000 miles away, separated from the blood and the noise by a high-definition screen and a plastic controller. The commander who signs off on the strike only authorizes a coordinate on a digital map. The engineer in a Virginia office park just writes lines of code to optimize a mathematical model, and the politician only approves a budget for technological innovation.
But the violence still happens.
Death still happens. Villages are still leveled. Families are still destroyed. But the acts themselves dissolve completely into a series of highly automated, gamified processes. We are left with an intricate, perfectly functioning, terrifyingly efficient system where absolutely no one has to repent, because no one feels they actually authored the act. It leaves us right back where we started, staring at that ordinary guy at his desk, watching a gray, pixelated rectangle vanish from his screen, secure in the knowledge that it was just another click in a long day's work.